Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wellness Curated by Anshu Bahanda. Each week, I chat to a leading light in health and wellness. And today, I'm delighted to present to you Dr. Anvita Madan-Bahel, who's going to be talking to us about how to deal with mental health issues. Dr. Anvita Madan-Bahel holds a PhD in counseling psychology from Cambria University in the US. She's done a lot of work with BAME mental health. She has 15 years of experience. She has a private practice. She works with the NHS, and she teaches counselors in training. She provides therapies to survivors of violence, both gender-based violence as well as trauma due to displacement and conflict. Welcome to the chat, Anvita.
Thank you, Anshu. It's lovely to be here.
It's lovely to have you here. Let's get straight into mental health. So, how come there are mental health issues?
And I think that's a great question because people ask that, and I see it as, do people ask, why do you get a headache, or why do you have a tummy bug, or why did you break a bone? The reality is that all of us live a life, and in life there is always going to be ups and downs. There will be loss, and loss doesn't always mean death. It can mean loss of a job, or loss of a relationship, loss of a dream, loss of an ambition, loss of a career. It could be so many kinds of losses. Or we might be stressed about something, or there might be anxiety. And that, in some ways, I would call life. That's life. Things happen. However, at times we might be faced with too many things, or we might not have the capacity to deal with things. We might not have enough. And that's when we face mental health issues. So, when somebody says, I broke up with someone and I feel depressed, I feel actually that's a really normal, reaction to a breakup. You will feel sad and you will feel upset about it. So those things our mental health, but sometimes what happens is mental health is something that we don't talk about, but I really want to normalize it. Emotional well-being is the same as physical well-being. So we never ask, why do we have a physical ailment? And I really want to remove this myth. It's really normal to have emotional problems, then, just the same way we have physical problems.
Okay, that's really well put. And thank you for putting it like that. Because, I love what you're saying about trying to normalize mental health, because that means more and more people can come out and talk about issues. And even what you say about a headache, one day you might have it, the next day you might not. So it doesn't mean that this is something that we're stigmatized with for the rest of our life. Right? I mean, you have it, it goes away, just like physical ailments come and go. So,
right, and we take care of it, right? Like, if you have a headache, you know what has to be done, and it's
yeah.
just giving tools to people. The problem is people don't talk about emotional well-being, so sometimes they don't have the tools. But going to mental health is getting the tools of saying, oh, if I'm feeling depressed because of something, these are my tools that will help me make feel better, and which we all learn at home with physical health. We learn if we have a headache, it might be dehydration or lack of sleep or something, but we don't have these conversations at home about mental health. So we never learn what are the tools around it.
Okay. Okay, so then tell me, why are there so many more mental health issues today than they were, say, 10 years ago, 20 years ago?
So I don't think there are more. I think people are willing to talk about it. Just like anything else, there is more awareness, there is more there's more conversations around these things. I think people were still struggling, but very few people were talking about it. Having said that, I do believe that younger people today have way more pressures in life than we have. The outpouring of social media really makes it an open platform. And the best example I always give is a photograph. When we clicked it, we put it in an album, we chose the selected people we were going to share it with. We knew these people were safe, we could share it with them. And now young people post their pictures, or everybody posts their pictures on a social media platform, and there are no filters of feedback. So reality is that is a pressure. Can you imagine that hundreds of people are looking at your photograph and commenting and all? So you have to be very resourced to not be impacted by that. So if you think about it, I do think that the young people have way more pressures today than we ever had growing up, or at our time. So I think it's both. It's talking about it, but also I think today's context or circumstances is more stressful as well.
Okay, thank you. And sometimes what I find from people is that they don't recognize mental health issues till it's become a lot more advanced. So,
Mm.
so my question to you is, how can we help people recognize them? I mean, is there a way of describing to people what they might be feeling? And how do these symptoms possibly show up? So people know that, okay, this is not normal. This is something where I need to tell someone, ask for help.
So, for starters, what I will say is expressing emotions is the healthiest thing that anybody could do. So, there's so many times when people try to hold back tears. I love tears flowing because it's such a release of emotions. As
Me
in, there are
too.
times that I know that when I start, like, tears start rolling, that I know I will feel better because there is a release in some ways. So, expression of feelings, I think, is a really important thing. And, it could be tears, it could be anger, it could be frustration, it could be wherever, but share with someone. Share with someone and talk to someone, because the more we hold it inside, it's the classic example of, if you keep putting rubbish in a bin, after a point it's going to stink, right? And that's just how emotions are. If you keep collecting them inside and not taking them out, they will cause problem at some point. So number one would be share, and always have in your support system people, friend, family, partners, anybody who you feel safe enough to, who will not judge you, who will be supportive, who won't be critical of you if you're struggling with someone. So have that support network around you. It's an interdependent thing. You'll share one day, they'll share one day. So have that. However, what happens after a point is that we the emotions become so much, or that they have started to impact our daily life. We're unable to get out of bed if we're very depressed. We're unable to sleep sometimes. We don't manage getting to work, or we're unable to take care of our children, or we're unable to socialize or meet people. When it starts impacting, or even like, so if I think of severity, you yourself will recognize saying, okay, I'm struggling with these emotions, and I'm struggling to feel happy at times, or at peace at time, or calm at time, or content. Happiness sometimes is an overrated word. It's more about feeling settled or feeling comfortable. And if you're not managing that, it might be good. And, talking to friends and family is really not doing it. It might be time to go and speak to somebody. Uh, Always remember that professional help looks very different to friends, because you always share that much with a friend, but not beyond, because you feel like there might be, what will they think about my parents, or my sister, or my partner, or the brother, or whoever, if I say they're being horrible to me. So you feel that, will they think, oh my god, I'm married to somebody horrible? And that pressure is not there with a professional. So I would, one, suggest that when it is feeling too much, go to a professional. And definitely, if things are impacting your life. Like I said, you're not being able to go to work, or you're not being able to do your daily chores, you're not being able to do things that you enjoy, then that is really a time to definitely seek professional help. And in the same continuum, if we were to expand it and it gets more complex, you might have to actually see a psychiatrist or a GP or somebody who can actually prescribe medicines for you to just support that and getting help. But remember that it's a continuum. And just because you seek help doesn't mean you're crazy. Like, that's the biggest myth I want to break. Like, everybody thinks if I go see a therapist, I must be crazy. And so they want to be at the crazy level to go and see a therapist. And what I will say is all of us are crazy. So I think you can just start seeing a therapist tomorrow, because we're all crazy.
What you're saying, which is a very valid point, is when you feel that it's impacting your everyday chores or your everyday tasks, when you feel like something is different, that's the time you can seek help. But I also feel that sometimes when you're very troubled about something, before it becomes an issue, if you're mulling over something, if something's really consuming you, there's no harm in getting help before it becomes an issue.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about is thinking about it from a preventative perspective, right?
Exactly.
So when we know there's a crisis, so say like I was talking about a loss or a breakup or, a medical issue, or, any of those things, so many things are connected to psychology or mental health or emotions. So at that time, if you can, and what is therapy? Therapy is a place where somebody is helping you understand the situation better. They're providing you tools how to deal with it. In some ways, and I don't say it in a bad way, but I always say we as therapists are the dumping grounds. So you're holding something and it's tricky and it's prickly and it's hard and it pains. And in my head, I just go and drop it at my therapist and say, now you hold it. It was too much for me. And the therapists are trained to hold it, to take care of it a little bit, but you're just sharing the burden. So you have a space where you can go and share the burden, and you can say, okay, for this 1 hour, can you hold this prickly thing? I'm just exhausted carrying it, right? So I just think those are the spaces. Like, if you feel like you're just feeling exhausted dealing with all these emotional things and things that are happening in your life, and you just want 1 hour where you can actually just de-stress and give it to somebody and share with somebody and process with somebody, that's your hour. Yeah.
Wonderful. That was wonderful. Now, tell me, is science able to shed any light at all on the causes of mental health concerns? Like, do they say, okay, it happens if there's a chemical imbalance, it happens when there's stress? Is there any scientific research around it?
Yeah, another great question, because I would like to break another myth. People believe that you can only be depressed if there's something wrong with you, like mentally, and mental health and mentally, and that's what they think. And I'll just share a short story. And this was a principal in Bombay. I had taken my son. He was all of, like, I think 18 months, and it was the first time he was going to school, and the whole idea of separation anxiety. He was crying, I was crying, and he wouldn't stop crying. And I left him crying, and I left, and I literally was shaking, and I needed something. So in the afternoon, when I came to pick him up, I was just like, okay, look, I couldn't deal with it. Maybe this is not a good idea. And she said to me, what is not a good idea? He was leaving his parents or mother for the first time to meet strangers. What an absolutely normal reaction to have, to cry. And I was like, that's true. And she's like, sometimes the problem, he's like, when he gets comfortable with the new environment, he will stop crying. But actually, it's the most normal reaction to have. And that was my best life lesson in some ways, because, and that's how I see mental health. What a normal reaction to have, that I feel like crying when I'm upset about something or something bad's happening in my life, right? What a normal reaction for me to have, to go and see or need to speak to somebody or to share with someone how uneasy I'm feeling, how anxious I'm feeling, how stressed I'm feeling, because whatever my life circumstances are and whatever I'm dealing with. So, this idea that life or emotional imbalance happens because of something chemical in our thing is somewhat of a myth. Does it impact our mood, like chemical imbalances or neurotransmitters in our body? Yes, they do. Neuroscience today is a beautiful science, a part of psychology that is really expanding and telling us more about neurotransmitters and chemical balances and everything, and they help a lot with pharmaceuticals around mental health. So I'm not in 1 minute not saying that in the continuum there are parts of it that happens, but I think if we had to think about mental health as a full circle and think about causes of it, it's a very small sliver of the whole pie in some ways. Mental health issues otherwise happen because, like I started and said, life happens. And what a normal reaction to have, to be upset or sad or angry about a situation.
So that's again, that's an interesting point, because you're saying don't mistake normal grief for mental health issues. Because as you go through life, there is grief, there's normal reactions that happen. So
Yeah,
everything
and grief is
a
like
bigger
when
deal
we
when we
say
make.
mental. Sorry, say that again.
I said
Grief for.
everything is not a bigger deal than we make it. Correct?
I think what I'm saying is that um, okay, let me make it in medical terms, right? When we spoke about the headache. Now, headache is a normal reaction. We still might take medicine for it. We might still visit a doctor for it. And that we don't, if it's a persistent headache, we seek professional help, right?
Mhm.
And that's what I think about sadness. You can sometimes self-medicate it by finding a distraction, meeting a friend, doing something that changes your mood, or you might say, okay, it's persisting for a very long time, let me seek professional help. Now,
Okay.
similar to a headache, the headache might be because of a tumor in your head that requires a different kind of specialist. And
Yeah.
that's the same thing with sadness. There's sadness that starts with, okay, I'm sad. I can manage sadness by distracting myself. I can manage sadness by going through a therapist. Oh, I'm so depressed because that I am unable to leave my bed, not able to sleep. I am now completely unable to eat, drink, sleep. I'm crying all the time. That requires an intervention where a psychiatrist or a hospital might be required. But see, do you see that I've just
Yeah.
made a parallel to a headache? And that's what I'm trying to say, that um, it just depends on how you're responding to your symptoms at a certain point.
Okay. So on that note, Anvita, if someone is feeling like they're not well mentally, or you see a family member or a friend suffering, could you explain to us what action should be taken? What is the process of getting help? Because it's fairly taboo. It's not as simple as, go to your GP. People don't know what to do. So tell us, what should people do?
Finding there are therapists all around you, and it is click of a button now to find yourself a therapist, because there are a lot of therapists in your neighborhood online. But yes, I hear what you're saying, that um, sometimes it's easier to call somebody and say, I need a specialist, I need a gastro specialist, can you help me? Versus calling somebody and saying, I feel really depressed all the time, can you recommend a therapist? Like, I understand in today's day and age that's a tougher conversation to have. But there are a lot of resources online. You can look at the BACP website or the UKCP website, or if you want somebody more from your cultural background, then a Batten website. But why am I saying that there are all these resources? Because I think you will say it's easy for me to find a gastrosurgeon. I look for top gastrosurgeon in London, 10 names come up, I pick one based on the hospital or whatever, and I go. So how do I do this for a therapist? This is where the difference occurs. Therapist is about what clicks with you. It's like a marriage. It's not about the degrees. It's not about what have they gone for, like one qualification after second qualifications and this certificate and that certificate. A person with 1,000 certificates might not click with you, and a person with one certificate might be your best therapist. So what I will say is that when you're ready to see a therapist, don't feel shy about meeting multiple. See what works for you, see what feels right. Like, it's about the right fit. Therapy is about the right fit. So don't, and there'll be therapists who will tell you very openly that that's absolutely true. So they wouldn't get offended if you say, actually, didn't feel like the right fit for me. They'll totally understand that. So find somebody that you feel like, okay, that worked. I felt like that person understood me. And being understood, it's such a subjective thing, right? So mental health or psychology is such a subjective thing that you are really the true expert on who is best for you. It's not, somebody else can't come and say to you, oh, but that's the best therapist. It doesn't matter. It might be the best therapist for them, but you are the best expert on knowing where you felt comfortable and you felt safe and you felt like you could really share with someone. So I would really recommend keeping that in mind and meeting multiple therapists whenever you decide to start therapy.
So you're saying look at websites like BACP, UKCP, Batten.
Yeah.
Those are some websites one could look at to get the name of the therapist.
Yeah, so Batten is somewhere that basically people who might be of like Black or Asian descent therapists, those are things that sometimes people want to consider. There's a big debate about people who are maybe coming out or thinking about their sexuality, tend to want to go to somebody who might be someone who has come out before or have gone through the process of thinking about their own sexuality. And they started a list called the Pink Therapy list, where people, only allies who of sexual orientation, like people who are in the part of the LGBTQ plus community, are part of it. And Batten is somewhere where people who are culturally competent on ideas are there. So think about what is important for you. Sometimes if you are dealing with a phobia, say, like something about like a phobia of going out of the house, getting cognitive behavioral therapy is the right type of therapy for you. And at that point, other things might not matter. So little bit of research of what do you think your issue is and who is best suited is preferable, like better.
Anvita, I'm going to interrupt you there. Can you explain cognitive behavioral therapy to us?
So if we look at the origins of therapy, it obviously came out 100 years ago, and then multiple fields have come out since. The forefathers, in some ways, we've all heard about Freud. He started the school of psychoanalytic therapy. Then the Rogerian is the humanistic theory. But these are all big words in some ways. It is the style of how somebody works. And that's what I'm saying. It'll be very hard to go learn about each style. So it is better if you meet somebody and see if their style works. But CBT and what was discovered is, so this idea that came up, which was cognitive behavioral therapy, was this idea that we first have thoughts, their cognitions, their thoughts, they impact our behavior. So if you think about a diagram that has arrows that are moving, then there are behaviors. So it's like, what are the actions? What are we doing? And then there are emotions in some ways. And they're all connected in some ways. And what they basically thought was that if you can change somebody's thoughts, somebody's behaviors, or somebody's, emotions, then it's cyclical and other aspects will change. So, for example, if I am somebody who is feeling really anxious before going for an interview. I'm so anxious that I basically can't even enter a, a room to actually give the interview. So my feeling is the anxiety, which basically is deliberate. It doesn't allow me to do something. It doesn't allow me to do an action. But my thought is, you know, I, I always fail. I always fail, and I always fail, so it's just not a good thing for me to go for an interview. And my behavior at that time might be, I might start throwing up, for example, because the thought is I'll always fail, our behavior is I start throwing up, and then the end result is I can't go for the interview because of my anxiety. So what a CBT person will come and do is say, let's change one of these things. So let's change this thought in your head where you're saying, I always fail. Is that really true? Is that really true? Is it always? No, sometimes I fail. Okay, already when you've changed it from always to sometimes, you can see how you're relaxing a bit. So then you can work with yourself saying, okay, this one time I might do okay, this one time might be okay. And you might then change the behavior saying, okay, I'm going to have some water if I feel like throwing up. And then the action changes and you can go for your interview. So that's what CBT and NHS provides a lot of CBT, because it is one of the most research ways of working. Yeah, so it depends what you are looking for, and that is one of them.
Okay, that was very well explained. Thank you. Now, what I'd like you to do for us is break up mental health issues on the basis of severity. So, is there a difference in, say, who we need to go to? So, if I'm getting anxious, do I need to go to someone different from if you're not sleeping? Or if, someone else is getting depressed, three different symptoms, do we need to go to different people?
Okay, so let me start with one thing is there is a correlation between how resourced we are, like what are our management abilities at a certain time in life, right? So I might manage the biggest crisis of my life with such strength and power and beauty, and everybody around me might think, oh my God, this is amazing. And then I and so, for example, I had health issues, I was a warrior, I was fine, we're getting a house constructed and it's giving me sleepless nights. So it is my relationship with what I feel I can cope with and what I feel I can't cope with. So I can't cope with stresses around work and legal things and this, that, and all. So it's just it's and that's maybe the first step, to go to a therapist to understand what can we cope with and what we can't cope with. What is it touching inside us where it just puts us off balance. So it's not an easy enough example to say, or if this happens, go to a therapist. It has a direct correlation with how resourced we are to deal with that issue. And it takes certain amount of work to understand, I'm really good at working with this issue, like don't care, breakups come, go, whatever. Oh, but if I have a loss, like that's the end of it, like I can't manage it, right? So it's understanding that relationship, and you can go for therapy for that. However, pose that if there are big crises in our life, they leave an impact. When we think about trauma, when we think about depression, when we think about anxiety, there are symptoms or, other. We have this book which gives diagnosis called the DSM-5. So you might have a borderline personality disorder or other things, or bipolar disorder. We are then going into the realm of psychological disorders, which are very severe. And at that point, you might need a team. So you might want to go to a therapist for talk therapy, but then you might want to go to a psychiatrist for medication. So this is the biggest confusion point because,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah,
Please tell us.
because people always I get to hear is, so we're looking for a psychiatrist, and I'm like, why are you looking for a psychiatrist? And they'll be like, oh, because she's depressed. And I'm like, so what do you need to go for a psychiatrist for? So it's to understand. So psychologists are people, like I said, who started from the time of Freud and everything, that provide talk therapy. They provide a space where somebody can go and share and process, and they feel lighter and they feel better, and they might be given some tools to deal with depression or anxiety or sadness and other things. Whereas a psychiatrist is someone who prescribes medicines. They might help with the talk therapy and everything, but psychologists cannot prescribe medicines because they are not medical doctors. They are people who've gone and got a degree in psychology. They might be doctors because of PhD, but they are not medical doctors. So if somebody needs to prescribe medicines, or somebody needs to look at it more from a physical, like something's happening in your body, or there's a physical reason, like I said, neuroscience is something that's really developed. If there's something happening in your the emotional you're emotionally unwell because of something in your body, psychiatrists do need to be involved because they are trained medical doctors who've done their MBBS and have chosen psychiatry as their specialization. So, depending on the severity of your symptoms, you might it might be sufficient to go to a therapist. But at any point where the therapist feels, okay, things need support, things are not working, everything has been tried and it's not working, maybe we need support of a GP or of a psychiatrist, they will suggest. Or GPs are good people to go to as well, for help, and they will refer you on to the right person. So it really, like, ask the question and people will help you and they'll suggest who you need to go to at that point.
Okay, so that was a very important thing that you've explained to us, that psychiatrists are people you go to get prescribed medicine. They don't do talk therapy. They might, but mostly you go to a psychologist for talk therapy. Wonderful.
Yeah, so they might work as a team and they might feed back. And obviously, if you go to a psychiatrist, they're just not going to give you medicine, right? Like they will spend half an hour with you knowing how the symptoms, what is working, how is it working. And sometimes medications, if we have severe symptoms of psychosis or we have issues around dissociation and everything, or anxiety where you're unable to manage the anxiety and not do things, medication become important. And at the same times, GPs might also suggest some antidepressants to help you, and just to help you manage the situation at that point. So just the way you are taking, you start having a viral infection or a bacterial infection and you take antibiotics. Similarly, GPs might recommend saying, okay, look, you're going through a really tough time. Let's just support you here with some antidepressants. And that's great. Personally, for me, what I do think is that antidepressants can be a way of life. You need to figure out ways to cope. They're not wrong. I'm not judging them. But dependency on them means that you're not resourcing yourself enough. So I think in the conjunction, I truly believe that there should always be therapy with medication rather than just medication, because I think it's like putting a band-aid versus healing a wound. So you're putting a
Is
band-aid with the medicine, but you're not healing the wound.
again a very good point that there should be therapy with medication if you need the medication rather than the other way around. So that's a very, very important point. But on that note, the other thing I wanted to ask you was, you said that there's a lot of research happening, neuroscience is progressing in leaps and bounds. Tell me, what mental health research are you most excited about at the moment?
So what excites me most in some ways is, like I'm saying, there were all these traditional ways of working, these Eurocentric Western ways of working where Freud came and CBT came and Rogerian came and all of those. But I feel like they were ways of coping for the Eurocentric mindset for that community. And it's not to say that mental health issues are not happening in cultures which are collectivistic. But what had happened there was that you always had in your extended family system, you always had an aunt or uncle or cousin or, somebody who you could go speak to. More and more as we are becoming more nuclear, people are seeking professional help. When that happens, I sometimes feel these Western Eurocentric ways don't really fit culturally, like they feel alien concepts sometimes. And
Right.
so, what excites me most about research is that there is tons of research happening in new ways of therapy. So, be it narrative therapy or art therapy or dance movement therapy, body psychotherapy. And so, these are all these ways which are basically inviting other ways of healing than just talking in the room. So there is an expansion, and for me most importantly the field of multicultural psychology, where people are saying, wait, we need to consider somebody's cultural, we need to understand somebody's system, somebody's context, we need to understand what's happening around them. It's called the biopsychosocial medical model, where you're looking at the biology, the psychology, the social, what's happening socially, what's happening medically. So you're looking at all aspects of an individual rather than saying, oh, we're only going to look at one silo, like only a psychology or only medicine or thing. So this a more holistic view of looking, I think that research is also very exciting.
Okay, lovely. And lastly, Anvita, can we leave people listening into this chat with a piece of advice, anything that you think will be valuable to them as they go through their lives?
Um, what um, I would really recommend is for people is that um, asking for help is very empowering, and sharing. There is a beautiful video, if everybody could watch it, by Brené Brown on vulnerability, and she speaks about
Wow.
how, yeah, Brené Brown, she's just outstanding. But what she speaks about is that she has seen people with maximum social power or empowerment who are able to be vulnerable with others, who are able to share what is going on maybe wrong in their life or where things are not working, and they tend to be really successful, and they need to seem to have a lot of social power and do really well. So the ability to be vulnerable with someone, I think, is such a it's such a difficult thing, but people who are able to do it, I think it's amazing. So what I would leave you with is to say, don't feel like that's a, people always see it as a weakness. How can I show what's wrong with me? How can I show what's not working? But actually, it represents you as somebody who's really empowered or strong, when you can be vulnerable, okay, when you can share with somebody how things are not going right. Just makes you more human, makes you just more real, makes you more approachable and accessible, actually. So that's what I would leave everyone with, that don't sharing or talking about messes of life doesn't make you a crazy person. It just makes you a person who's actually taking responsibility, taking ownership to, make things right. Messes are normal, but, you know, just staying with them just increases the mess. But if you actually talk about it, you actually can change things and come out of things much better, much healthier, and more resourced, more resilient.
Thank you so much, Anvita. That was an incredible chat. And thank you for listening in. That was Dr. Anvita Madan-Bahel, and we talked about how to deal with mental health issues. And this is Anshu Bahanda at Wellness Curated. Thank you very much.
Thank you.